What's good in the hood, YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here bringing you another video. Today I'm bringing a video on Power Rangers Hyperforce episode 12. Now we are just about halfway through the season, which is pretty crazy. Again, we don't know if there's going to be a second season for Power Rangers Hyperforce. That'd be great. Again, everyone has to talk about it, get a lot of hype for it, and I really want that to happen. That would be great to happen, and Power Rangers Hyperforce has been great. But let's move on because this episode was jam-packed with stuff. It probably is, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that feels this way, like the best episode the show has had so far. I definitely think that is a fact. So many things happened. We got so many reveals. I don't want to go into it right now because I want to give you guys some background and stuff, and I'll do my last minute things about talking about what we basically got in the end towards the end of this. But let's get started here because there's a lot to go over, and that's kind of important. So as we know in the previous episode, the Rangers had contacted Jen Scotts trying to see if she could help them out and find out more information. They are now in the Hyperstream, and they've been there for 3 days. And what happens is that they still can't contact Marv as well. The Alliance has also been traveling around. They are actually in the Time Stream while the Rangers are not. And what happens is that the Rangers try to hold hands and connect with Marv, which they managed to do so. They managed to get a small, faint signal towards him that helps them track where Marv is, but it's not great. Vesper even offers to use her power to power the ship so that they can go and find Marv. And what they end up realizing is that they have to travel from the Hyperstream where they're located in right now to the Time Stream. So what Vesper decides to do is that she will help when it's really needed, which does end up happening. It was something that was kind of unclear as to when it would happen, but it did end up happening in the end. So what does end up happening from here is that the Rangers suddenly receive a message from Jen Scotts. The actress who plays her is Erin Cahill. Jen Scotts obviously is the Time Force Pink Ranger, and it was a really cool little message that she sent in, basically telling them that she's sending in a special agent to help out, and right now she can't help out herself, and that they should stay strong and they have each other, and that's what's important right now. Again, very secretive in a way, but at the same time still willing to help in some way with this new special agent. Now, I'm sure many of you, including myself, and I'll say this right now, myself included with this, immediately assumed Sixth Ranger, no doubt, gonna happen, has to be that, right? We'll see. We'll get into that towards the end, exactly how that works, but it is interesting to note. So what does end up happening from here is that Alpha directs the ship, and then Eddie sets calculations so that they can go find Marv. The Rangers are then thrown from the Hyperstream to the Time Stream, where they end up finding the Alliance leadership, which they plan to crash into. From there, they have a map that shows up, and Eddie navigates between the waves of the Alliance leadership to eventually bring them towards the ship. In the meantime, we end up seeing Marv, who is on the ship now. Now, previous episode, we didn't even see Marv because it didn't make sense to. Now he's in the show, and what we see is that he's in this empty white room that has bars on it. The bars are energy bars, not like the energy bars you eat, but if you're like in a cellar, imagine the bars being made of energy. That's what it basically is, and he can't morph, he can't contact the Rangers, and, he's been there for quite some time, not being able to eat much at all. So, this all happens. Some putty is even scatter into the room. They throw rocks at Marv. Things aren't looking good for him. Eventually, a figure appears. It's not clear whether or not this is the Alliance leader or not. They never really mention it in the show. It kind of feels like it would be, because they're not really clear, and because of how he acts with his sinister personality, you would think it's him. It's still not clear though, but I would imagine it is. They didn't really go into detail on that whole thing. So anyway, basically this character wants to know about Alpha 55. the idea is that they think that Alpha 55 is the key to everything. That he has connections to the morphing grid and all these other details. And the thing is that in reality, Marv realizes over time that like they don't know anything. Like they're working on a very primitive Time Force ship, a ship that actually was used to freeze villains in the past. So you know, something that was probably around during the time of the original Time Force Rangers, which is interesting, of course, because that was what happened when Rancic was in charge of one of the ships that he took into the year 2001. So again, could be really interesting to see what they end up doing there. Then from here, what happens is that Marv also tricks the this figure into believing that there was a tracker on the ship, and the figure starts contacting the people around the ship about how there might be a tracker and all that, and Marv basically says that it's not something that you can just find so easily, and I would only be the one to help. And he even offers to turn evil. Like, he literally offers to become evil and join the Alliance, but they decide that they can't trust him, so they don't let him help out in the end. And they constantly refuse his assistance, even though he kind of comes across as being like he's willing to do this stuff, because he totally acts serious when he addresses them. Like, he doesn't act like he's just messing around with them. He totally knows how to put on a straight face and come across as being like genuine and serious about what he plans to do. So all this is happening. Then from here, what ends up happening is that Marv realizes that they don't really know about the strength and all that. I'm trying to think what else happens here. The other thing is that they bring up the point about Chloe's parents and how, you know, maybe this figure might have done something and led to them being supposedly destroyed or whatever. And you know, there's other points that are brought up regarding the different friends that they know and the information that the Alliance learned from Jack's data. So again, they're very, very behind. They don't know as much as they should. Again, it's very interesting to see where the Alliance really stands as far as advancements go. Like, they're not that ahead in any real way. It's really interesting to think that way, because there was constantly this fear that they were really, really powerful, this Alliance. They don't seem as powerful as initially thought, as they were initially thought to be. So what does end up happening from here is that Scorpina is eventually contacted by the Alliance leader that the Hyperforce ship has appeared. Premator is then summoned, and he ends up using the invisiportals that he made from Mesagog, that he got from Mesagog, to go onto the Hyperforce ship, which brings us into having split stories occurring this episode, which is interesting. So we have stuff going on on the Hyperforce ship, and we have stuff going on the Alliance ship. So that is obviously something important to note. Eventually, what ends up happening is that Vesper takes over the controls and travels through space and does it pretty well. Eddie checks if he can find Marv. Not so easy to do so, and Marv appears in the kitchen. Or Marv. Marv is actually, of course, Premator, who comes in disguise, and the way that they know this also is because he comes in disguise and slaps his butt. So, you know, it's a little bit of a silly, obvious joke that's going on here. And again, it's Premator again, which is interesting to see because he's back. So that is something to note. But again, the big difference between him and like past villains is the fact that he's recognized and he has a unique ability. That's the reason why like him being in multiple episodes makes sense, because of what ability he has with his ability to teleport and also his ability to change his appearance. That's something that's really important here. So from here, you know, the Rangers don't believe that it really is him. They end up discussing what they can do. Eddie ends up thinking of bringing a mirror to unveil his identity, which does end up working. It does reveal that Premator is there and it's not Marv. From here, it seems that this fake Marv is actually looking to get Alpha 55, which is interesting, of course, because that gives them a clue as to who they're interested in capturing. Because again, as we knew in the past, when Marv was initially captured, we knew that it wasn't Marv who was meant to be captured. So that is, of course, important. So what does end up happening from here is that Chloe then plans to distract Premator. They end up deciding to use bananas to try to distract Premator because they think he's an ape and maybe that would work. Things don't work out as easily as they hope. So from here, Jack goes to restrain Premator. Things don't work out so well because eventually Premator shapeshifts into his dog, and with the dog, the handcuffs do not fit the dog, so the dog actually escapes. And then from there, Vesper tries to move the ship, trying to flip it, trying to create all sorts of problems so that the Rangers can continue to deal with Premator. In the meantime, we then end up seeing back on the Alliance ship that really it's a very primitive Time Force ship, as we mentioned before, and all this is occurring, and a villain is in the room shuffling around, or at least that's what they believe it is, and Marv tries to tap the back wall, but he hears from the opposite side, near the energy, a figure that seems to be hurt. Most likely this figure was trying to get in by breaking the bars. So what ends up happening is that the figure appears behind Marv as he actually decides to connect his morpher to the energy bars, which doesn't end up working because he's hoping to power his morpher through the energy bars. It doesn't work. That figure turns out to be a Time Force Ranger in silver. So it's a silver Time Force Ranger, which is interesting because we've never had a silver Time Force Ranger, of course. And the figure appears, and it turns out to be something that everyone lost their minds when literally everyone was freaking out. I mean, I was freaking out, and it was just amazing. Turns out that this silver Time Force Ranger and Marv's brother is actually Yoshi Suderso, his actual brother in real life. So he basically got revenge on his brother. If those of you that don't know, Yoshi Suderso, what happened is that during Power Morphicon in 2016, it was revealed, and no one knew. A lot of people knew, but Yoshi had no idea that Peter was going to be the Blue Ninja Steel Ranger, and then Yoshi got to reveal to everyone that that's what's happening, and so it was this huge surprise that Peter, his own brother in real life, is the Blue Ninja Steel Ranger. So now this time around, out of nowhere, Yoshi shows up as the silver Time Force Ranger, and it's a big shocker, which is really cool. Awesome moment. I mean, I can't even say how cool it was to see that moment occur. Again, we didn't get to see him in costume, obviously, and we probably won't be seeing any of these in costume until conventions later on in time, but it is interesting to see. Anyway, Yoshi goes to break out his brother. He's pretty interesting, and again, he's playing the character Joshi, which is, they even address this, is the fact that actually in real life, Yoshi, a lot of times people for some reason have an issue with pronouncing Yoshi, so they refer to him as Joshi, and so it was kind of a nod to that, and then also the fact that Joshi, Yoshi, you get it, it works, it totally works. It's interesting how that is. So then from here, the putties start throwing rocks and everything, and they don't understand that Marv actually is trying to tell them that he's actually Premator, because he pretends to be Premator to convince them to let him go, but they don't really understand things. The putties even try to communicate with other putties elsewhere, and things are just not working out so well. So eventually Joe teleports through. And what happens is that Joe no longer is visible when Marv finally steps out of the cell, and an alarm actually goes off. So then from there, Marv deals with some putties, and then Joe and Marv continue to talk to each other. There's also this constant concern in Marv's mind whether or not Joe is real, of course, because of the fact that in the past it could have been Premator, and he's still unclear because again he's been in this prison cell for quite some time. He doesn't know. He could be losing his mind. He doesn't know what to expect. It could be all fake, and he thought his brother was dead. He just doesn't know what's real anymore, basically. So from here, what does end up happening is that Joe wants Marv to join him and get to the Hyperforce Rangers. Joe decides to connect his morpher as well to Marv's morpher so that they can somehow teleport to the Hyperforce ship. But the thing is that it doesn't end up working out so well because they're not able to connect everything. So from here, there is this fake version of Chloe's mom that appears, and that is obviously Premator again. Another attempt, obviously, for Premator trying to attack the Rangers and trick them. Jack tries to deal with the fake Chloe's mom. Things continue to be a problem. Eddie, Chloe, and Jack attack, and Premator starts using his white energy attacks that he's had before against the Rangers. Alpha, in the meantime, is hiding, and Eddie takes control while Vesper tries to take down Premator. That whole interaction is pretty interesting. Chloe eventually goes off to finish off Premator, which is interesting. She even tries to paralyze him, and it's just a really interesting experience overall. What does end up happening as well is that Hyperforce is being attacked from the outside and the inside. I'm trying to also just make sure I'm reading some information. I have a lot of notes, that's why I'm kind of constantly stopping, just for those of you wondering. And Vesper and Chloe are the only ones that are actually able to use their Zords, but it doesn't make any sense because the ship is in terrible shape. They eventually try to ram the ship into the Alliance ship, which doesn't end up working. Premator actually finds the pocket dimension, which Eddie initially was thinking of pushing Premator into, but Premator manages to get the upper hand and actually throw Eddie into, which he's left there crying, which is really sad and an unfortunate event. And then from here, we end up seeing back on the Alliance ship that Marv goes to check on Joe and tries to morph. Well, actually what happens is that Joe basically powers up his morpher, and he's then able to morph. Marv still isn't completely sure as to whether or not Joe is real, and Joe wants to coordinate with Alpha 55 so that Marv wants to be able to connect with Alpha 55 and everything. And it's still not clear as to everything that's going on from here. So then the Alliance ship gets damaged. Marv tries to use the intercom system to communicate with the Hyperforce Rangers, which does not work because the shields of the Alliance ship are actually on, and because of that, if the shields are on, they can't communicate, which seems a bit odd, but I get it. They're trying to create a way so that things aren't super simple, which makes sense. So then from here, Joe goes invisible and Marv follows after. Marv and Joe appear around a corner. There are some putties. And also we end up seeing Valkynos, a villain that we haven't seen since, the second or third episode at least, I think. It's crazy to think how long it's been since we've seen it. Maybe 4 episodes even. Pretty wild to think that we're seeing this villain we haven't seen in quite some time and even heard the name of in quite some time. So from here they continue to fight. Joe goes and tries to teleport behind where Marv's cell is, and then teleports near the training area. He tries to create a distraction so that they can continue to travel and get to the control panel so that they can remove the Alliance ship's shields, but things are not working out perfectly. They distract some putties. Eventually Marv does end up morphing, and at one point or another, what ends up occurring is that Marv uses his Blade Blaster to slash through 9 putties, and then Valkynos eventually appears summoning a bunch of putties as well. All this occurs. Marv even tries to pretend to be evil and say that he will help take out the tracker. Valkynos doesn't believe him, of course, which is expected. And, things just continue to get even more intense. So then, from here, Alpha 55 freaks out, and Eddie decides to go and bring So, there's the whole event where Eddie's brought in to the pocket dimension. Then they think of actually shooting Premator out of the airlock, so that way he is pushed off the ship. So all this continues to happen. Jack then strikes a stance and tries to actually attack Premator. Things don't go perfectly, but there are lots of pretty interesting attacks that occur. Chloe even tries to create trails of bananas, as I said before. That doesn't work out very well because, he doesn't think like a monkey. He's a little bit more intelligent than that. Vesper even tries to convince Premator to go after the bananas. Doesn't work. They just keep trying different things. Nothing's working. Premator's destroying the ship, doing all sorts of chaos. And eventually, they get into a point where Premator tries to open up a portal, and everyone tries to interfere and prevent Premator from escaping with Alpha 55. It just continues to spiral into this crazy mess. At one point, they end up opening the airlock, and they realize that the only way that they're going to be able to get Premator off the ship is if they use the gem that Chloe got from Lady Guinevere in the previous episode. So she uses it. She gains this new Battleizer form, which I'll have an image up. It's an image that actually is fan art. If you're wondering where I got that image from, it's fan art that someone posted. It's really cool. But again, they haven't done like an official image like they did for like the Rangers and everything. So keep that in mind. This is just fan art, but I think it's really good fan art that was worth putting up here. So from here, we see the fan art. We see this armor, which is this gold armor that goes over her gauntlets, her boots, her head. She has wings. She has all sorts of stuff. She's just pretty amazing looking. And she deals with Premator. Eventually, he is shot off the ship, and the Alliance ship is still trailing them. So then from here, Valkynos summons this wall of putties to attack Joe. Joe is no longer invisible. He has to fight the putties and fight Valkynos. Marv, in the meantime, is on the ground because he's actually really hurt, as we know. And he ends up going to the control room where he ends up seeing that Scorpion is there. So he realizes that there's no point in him attacking her because he's really weak. So instead, he actually goes down to the engine room to start smashing at it and trying to connect his... trying to connect his morpher to the engine room's power, which ends up working. He ends up contacting the Hyperforce Rangers, and from here, what ends up occurring is that the Alliance leader and Scorpina appear down near the engine room, trying to stop Marv in his tracks. But then Marv is eventually teleported off the ship and brought back onto the Hyperforce ship. Once on there, they realize that they still weren't able to get Joe, Marv's brother, and suddenly Joe appears on the ship and greets the Rangers. Everyone's a little bit cautious, of course, of his sudden appearance, but it does work out okay. In the end, what does end up happening from here is that, they say their goodbyes, and basically, Joe confirms for him that, he is real, and, Eddie thinks that he's real. Everyone just starts to make it clear. Everyone feels, yeah, he's real. He has to be it. And it's pretty amazing to see all that occur. What does end up happening is, he does make Marv say, like, trust me, I'll come back soon, don't worry. Now, that is all interesting. From here, they also discuss the fact that it seems that probably Jen Scott has been keeping a lot of secrets from them. They originally thought that Time Force officers were disbanded and that Time Force really wasn't much of a thing anymore. And clearly there's a lot of things that are more of a mystery than they know of so far, so they need to contact her. What does end up happening from here is that they plan to heal up Marv and also go and communicate a message to Jen Scott where they can find out more information about what she's hiding. So all this does happen. That's the end of the episode. I wanted to give you my last thoughts. For starters, obviously Time Force Silver Ranger. Interesting idea. I like it. Yoshi is a cool choice to have. It totally made sense. I really like that idea. Again, we did end up getting to see a Silver Ranger, Battleizer this episode, and just some amazing fighting, story, and great stuff. Just a lot of fun. As far as what I would expect, if Joe is going to be the Sixth Ranger, which it does seem pretty likely that that is definitely going to be the case, hopefully, again, they don't have all the funding. That's the one thing that they even mentioned in the Fireside Chat. That's part of the reason why they were like, they need to do something. It's just not clear as to what that will end up being in the end. So, again, it's likely that Joe is going to appear again. As far as things go, it will likely be similar to the situation that happened with Ryan in Power Rangers Lightspeed Rescue, where he was the Titanium Ranger, and he had his own story going on, and they had their story going on. Now, does that mean that we'll be seeing his own story? Not necessarily, but he'll pop in. Or you can even say that with Tommy during his first season in a way. It's sort of like Tommy when he was the Green Ranger, where he would come in and out, although a little different. But Ryan, the Titanium Ranger, I see that one a lot more so, and I think that's kind of okay. It makes sense because of the fact that, again, if they did it any other way, they really wouldn't be able to do guests as easily. They could do guests. It's not like it's not possible. I just don't think it's as likely, just because of the fact that their seating arrangement works in a certain way, and they probably want to balance it out so that they can get guest and also do this. So that is all interesting. Of course, that is also why we didn't hear anything about guests that were appearing this week, because people were expecting some sort of guest. This made sense because of the fact that there was this big reveal going on today. So all that is good. It should be interesting to see where they will go now. We don't know what time where they're going to be going in the time stream now. Again, it seems that the Alliance is definitely in a more primitive state with technology and just a lot of things. They assume a lot more of the Hyperforce Rangers than they realize, and also the Hyperforce Rangers have a way more advanced ship, so that's interesting. And they also think that the Hyperforce Rangers are cloaking, which is why they can't actually locate the ship that the Hyperforce Rangers have. So basically, it's really interesting, all the things that we learned about the Alliance this episode, what we learned about several characters this episode, because it was just so much occurring at once and just a lot of fun. So I know this episode was, this review was fairly long, and again, it's also because of the fact that there's a lot that were going on in this episode, but I think as a whole, it was a lot of fun. The Fireside Chat was great. There was so much humor in this episode, and it was good humor, and to be honest with you, again, as I said before, it's probably my favorite episode so far of this show. It's been so good, this episode. So I definitely will say this much right now. If you are watching this and you want to get into Power Rangers Hyperforce, this is the episode that I will say right now is such a worthwhile episode to watch. If you start from here, obviously you're going to miss a lot, but I would say this much right now. It's a good show to watch, and this episode definitely does a lot of really great things. There were a lot of problems with technical issues this episode. I totally noticed it. It was constant, whether it be Malika's microphone having several problems constantly. There were several times where her voice got all screwed up because the microphone wasn't working properly. They morphed Marv, and then they had the morphing sequence toward the beginning where the Rangers morphed, and Marv was included in it even though he shouldn't have been there. There were also issues with the screen going to a white screen at one point, which was random. Music had issues during the credit sequences. There were just lots of small issues constantly occurring. Nothing that was super terrible, just a lot going on. So I love your opinions. Please remember to like, comment, subscribe. Tell me what you guys think, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.